Well, thank you so much, Ruti, also for the invitation to speak today here at the OCP as part of the sustainability work stream. Welcome to the presentation on developing a product category rule, also called PCR, for the lifecycle assessment of data center equipment. It's a topic I'm personally very passionate and excited about. Maybe a little bit about my background. I started as an electronics engineer in microsystem technologies, worked on building wireless sensor systems for the Internet of Things, and had the privilege to work closely together with environmental scientists, LCA practitioners throughout that process, who taught me how to do, or how to implement design for eco-design into the electronics design process, and also to accurately account for the environmental benefits and burdens of the technology that we are developing. So this being said, one of the main things that I learned throughout this process was that fair environmental assessments can only be done through collaboration with engineering, with suppliers, the people actually producing these parts and components, and also with tool and data developers as part of this process to really accurately account for the emissions. So this being said, the PCR is an opportunity to really collaborate as a larger industry to combat climate change and to have a methodology that we are all aligned on that allows for fair comparisons. Before we start the presentation, I would like to mention two of my collaborators on the Google side, Sophia Lopez and Misha Weiss-Lin. Both of them have successfully kicked off a PCR very similar to what we are proposing today, but specific to laptop computers and desktop PCs. So that was kicked off in 2023, led to a successful first draft on product category rules that will serve as a foundation for our engagement on data center equipment moving forward. And then Chris, oh, I'm sorry, 1 second. So quickly, the agenda. First, I will talk about where we are at Google in quantifying Scope 3 emissions using life cycle assessment, what's motivating us towards harmonizing on the rules and the standards we are applying to conduct life cycle assessments, and then Chris will walk us in more detail through the data center PCR equipment roadmap and what the immediate next steps are, and we'll close with the call for action. So we've learned a lot about the Scope 3 assessment in the earlier talks today. So for Google also, this is a very significant area where emissions are arising. So our team is responsible for accurately measuring, quantifying the Scope 3 emissions of everything that goes into our fleet. So meaning computing, storage, accelerator platforms. And the way we do the accounting is that we do a bottoms-up approach using LCA and really start from all processes, from raw material extraction to individual parts production, the assembly in a tray, and then the integration in a complete rack or server that's then deployed in our larger fleet. Why are we doing the Scope 3 accounting? Obviously, we need to accurately measure the emissions associated with this equipment. We need to forecast fleet-level emissions based on our continuously evolving and maturing fleet. But most of all, we need to really trace emissions down to its root causes and be able to identify carbon reduction levers to really apply the most efficient, most effective carbon reduction measures in order to reduce the carbon footprint of our fleet. Chris, do you want to take over and explain the LCA process really briefly? Yeah.
Well, the LCA process is a holistic, very iterative process in which you at first go through a step of defining your goal and scope and identifying the purpose of the LCA in and of itself. And the bulk of the majority of an LCA study is the inventory analysis, and this is probably the focus of all the other talks where you've heard before, getting appropriate data, knowing your input flows and output flows, and this is the biggest challenge doing this assessment. And then later on, according to the actual impact assessment, depending on the impact category you have chosen, you convert your input and output flows into an actual input, an actual impact. And in the end, you draw your own conclusions towards the actual conclusions you want to draw. So how you want to implement that into your company policies, and what kind of actions do you want to take. And in that sense, we, since this process is in and of itself pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of inconsistency in the consensus of how to do it in detail. And you want to continue with the harmonization?
Yeah, sounds good. So talking about the LCA process and being compliant with the ISO 14040 and ISO 14067, which is specific to product carbon footprints, these standards provide a rough guidance on how to conduct LCAs, what to document in the process, what to specify. And obviously, in order to suffice the requirements that we just outlined, every company needs their own clear specification on the accounting rules. So in our case, there's a lot of sophistication in building the lifecycle inventories for the LCA analysis, building commodity-specific LCA models that allow us to really quantify material inputs, energy inputs, and apply supplier specifics and modeling the processes and the emissions to soil, to water, to air by applying supplier specific data. And I think this is one of the focus areas where we need clear definement on what the minimum degree of supplier specific data is in order to do accurate accounting of our assessments. So moving towards a harmonized PCR, what we really need to do as an industry is to align on technology-specific model choices, especially when it comes to assessing advanced technologies in data centers, servers, chips, TPU technologies, GPUs that are evolving over time that require really advanced LCA modeling practices and advanced lifecycle inventories. We do need to align on the system boundaries of what we consider in scope, from everything like key commodities to the rack level and supporting infrastructure. And we also need clear alignment on solid for and background data sets that we plug into our models. We talked briefly about the primary data needs. There need to be minimum requirements on the kind of data we plug into our assessment, and need to set some requirements around the quality of these data sets that we are collecting from suppliers and plugging into the analysis. And then obviously the documentation of the framework, which could potentially lead to blueprints that we could use for LCA analysis in this space.
Okay, thank you, Stephan. Well, you've heard it before, net zero emissions is going to happen and you're in it if you want it or not. And in that sense, we can testify to that as the Fraunhofer Institute. We see a lot of momentum taken up by the industry at the moment, which is fantastic. And also, you've heard that also before, the regulatory landscape is changing and more action will very likely soon be mandated. So it is happening. And LCA is a fantastic tool in order to account for your product or services emissions throughout their life cycles. And next to the accounting, it helps you environmental benchmarking. It sheds more transparency into the supply chain and helps you comply with your company policies and, well, regulatory compliance as well. So in that sense, there's a lot of action, and we have conducted an initial phase 1 study where we assessed the landscape of the standards, and we came to the conclusion that it is currently a very difficult field to navigate this landscape. So there's a multitude of standards building standards that are built on other standards, and there's sector guidances, and there's different sector guidances, and overlapping guidances, and product category rules that categorize products in a specific manner, and there's product-specific rules. So for the LCA practitioner, it is currently a bit difficult to navigate this landscape, and that's what we're trying to remedy. A few words on the Fraunhofer Institute. We have been doing research and development and supporting industry developments in Germany for about 30 years, and our particular institute, we're focused on the ICT sector in particular, and we have a very strong focus on sustainability as well. So we frequently engaged in consulting activities with the European Commission as policy advisors, and also we're frequently doing life cycle assessment methodology reviews for hyperscalers and original equipment manufacturers. And in that sense, again, we're a first-hand witness to see varying degrees of LCA maturity across the sector. Some are very advanced, some are still beginners, and a lot boils down to this difficult landscape with the standards. So where to navigate, how to navigate this through as a practitioner. And in that sense, we're trying to move forward, supporting and remedying this issue. And these challenges, these difficulties with navigating the landscape bring about many different sector guidances, have different goal and scope definitions, for example, inconsistent descriptions of how granular we're supposed to be, and how data requirement descriptors, they're to varying degrees. So even if you find a guidance and you abide by a certain guidance, and your competitor or your partner abides by a different sector standard, you cannot compare the results in the end because you're following different rules. And beyond that, beyond the lack of comparability, we also need a way to standardize communication along the supply chain. If we request data for our Scope 3 emission calculations, we need a certain data format that we can directly incorporate into our life cycle assessment. So we also need to find a way to standardize that. And well, essentially, ideally, we're going towards a pyramid scheme in some way, a good pyramid scheme in that sense. The icing of the standardization cake with a specific product category rule for data sensor equipment. And yeah, to all move towards our own climate goals. And what are more detailed goals? What do we intend to do? We don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to build upon the standards and the rules that already exist. So we first need to do a landscaping and build our own pyramids and see what we can use, what can we recycle, and where do we need fine-tuning? How do we need to add this? So, and from the get-go, from our phase 1 study we did previously on notebooks and desktop computers and previous experiences, we know that the immediate focus of the industry currently lies on impact category of global warming potential, so carbon emissions. Nonetheless, we want to stress that life cycle assessments encompasses way many different impact categories far beyond carbon emissions. So we want to leave the door open and see what other impact categories might be relevant for the data sensor equipment sector. And we're working towards a configurable, parameterizable model building block system, difficult one, and to align with data model developers in the sector. We need to define data accuracy and coverage to more precisely define our emission hotspots and to drive supply chain actions. As I said earlier, communication along the supply chain requires harmonization of data reporting. This will be a focus. And in the end, as you might have already figured out, the overarching theme is comparability. We need fair results that we can compare with each other. And how are we going to do this? Fraunhofer will be the program operator. We'll be primarily focusing on stakeholder consultation. So we are not going to predict or dictate anything. We of course want your opinion. So everybody is addressed here in the room. We'll be drafting the PCR document. We'll be driving model development and supporting in that sense, but in the end it is all up to you, the PCR members, the project members. Currently we are engaged with hyperscalers, OEMs, applied research, and OCP is part of the team, which we're very, very happy about. And thanks for the invitation to speak here today. And with your help, we'll be receiving feedback on the drafts we issue, and figure out specific requirements that you guys need, and work together collaboratively on the model development. So where are we today? As I said, phase 1, we have already accomplished phase 1. We have issued a first PCR draft for laptop and desktop computers that has undergone revision and feedback sessions. And as soon as we kick off the next phases, phase 2, 3, and 4 will all start and kick off in parallel. And phase 2 will be continuing phase 1, finalizing the PCR for laptop and desktop computers. And phase 3 will be essentially a follow-up on phase 1, but streamlined, because all the learnings and findings we concluded from phase 1 will directly benefit phase 3, so that will all be much more streamlined. Phase 4 will be the modeling side of things, where we test, refine, reiterate our models that are necessary. And a special mention is a collaboration. As I said, we will not be dictating anything. We want your opinion, we want you to engage, so everybody here should feel addressed and come forward and take part in this initiative. And this project will only live through collaboration, and therefore we are very thankful to be engaging with the OCP, who will be acting, let's say, as a funnel for us to engage with the wider and also deeper industry of the data center equipment. So it will be a feedback loop of reach and inform and obtain feedback. So we're very much looking forward to working together with you and working towards an industry harmonized PCR standard for data center equipment. And how you can engage and reach out to us with the final remarks, my colleague Stephan will be finishing this talk.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you all for your attention and interest in this topic and project. So we're really looking forward to your engagement and would really like your feedback. So please reach out to the program operator, to the Fraunhofer folks, with providing feedback, questioning about options to get involved, and then also get on the mailing list so that we can include you in the anticipated project kickoff in Q1 2025. There's also great preparatory work that Fraunhofer has conducted. Please check out the homepage that's linked in the document, and also explicitly the white paper, the position paper that was doing the road mapping for the current PCR landscape. So you'll find information on current sectorial guidance and how the data center ICT roadmap for PCR development kind of fits into that landscape. So with that, thank you very much, and we are looking forward to your feedback and conversations after the talk. Thank you so much.
Just to check that I understand, so the PCR, the idea of the PCR is to basically give you a framework to do a life cycle assessment that could give you the EPDs, which would be useful for the data centers, because then it tells them what the embedded carbon is. When you try and do an LCA directly with any IT equipment, the problem is lack of data. So the idea of the PCR then is really that so the provider of the equipment doesn't have to disclose that data, but they use the PCR in order to do the EPD. How do we drive that into the industry so that every piece of equipment that ends up in the data center has an EPD, and therefore we've got the embedded card. They've got the scope 3 in our hands. At the moment, we don't have scope 3 in our hands. Yeah. So it's more of a statement, semi-question. But how do we get the data, or how do we engage with the manufacturers in a better way?
That's a fair question. We're currently also engaged in other initiatives, the Semiconductor X project that's launched in Europe. It's like a digital twin and sustainability digitization program. Same problem, nobody wants to share the data, but everybody wants to do their carbon accounting. So in that project, we're working towards developing a data quality rating system, essentially. So no primary data will be shared other than the emission factors, the carbon emissions, with a particular quality rating. So you kind of get a feel for how reliable is the data you receive from your suppliers, and can make adjustments based on that. So if you get a very poor rating, you can still incorporate them and start pushing and building more pressure on your suppliers to provide better quality data ratings.
Yeah, and maybe to add, like the PCR framework is really supposed to be a preparation towards then a final EPD. And like you mentioned, this could be a blueprint that suppliers could apply in order to do or to apply minimum requirements towards conducting these LCAs.
Hi, I'm Natalie Bates from the Energy Efficient High Performance Computing Working Group. And I have a fairly narrow question. Your intended scope or inventory, does it include both the building as well as the compute, et cetera, equipment, the ICT equipment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the initial start of this PCR and the initial focus is really the ICT equipment inside the racks. So meaning machine learning accelerators, computing, storage platforms, and the rack level infrastructure, things like liquid cooling, for example, but not the building infrastructure in itself. That's, for this particular project, excluded from scope.
Well, if you included the liquid cooling, would you include the mechanical systems of the data center?
That's a good question, and I think this is exactly why we need to define these boundaries as a larger industry. Very good question, and I think this is exactly where we need to define a certain cutoff. Yeah, the boundary between the larger infrastructure and the equipment itself.
I do have one more question, sorry. The life cycle analysis typically includes things besides carbon, other environmental factors. Are you, I think you mentioned that is part of what you wanted to do, but specifically, in my estimation, water usage is a key one that we probably also need to look at. Are you thinking of that lines too?
100%, and very good call out. So again, the product carbon footprint is the starting point, but we've also aligned with our peers that clearly we need to go beyond just carbon footprinting, right? Like you mentioned, water consumption, critical material usage, especially in building these platforms from a scope 3 perspective. So that is clearly intended as an interim goal. And the life cycle inventories that we would be building as an industry and defining those building blocks should prepare us to do more than just carbon accounting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Natalie, just to answer your question before regarding the building and building life cycle analysis. So, you know, the architectural engineering industry, I think, has handled a lot of the building life cycle analysis. There's a lot of data out there, PCRs, et cetera. So we would default to what those industries have developed, unless it's something that's unique to the data center industry. And then I think if it's something that's unique, then we would propose a PCR for that process.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. There's already some interaction and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you.